Well, good morning and happy Labor Day weekend. My name is Dale. I'm one of the pastors here. And I thought I'd start this morning by introducing my family, since I'm going to be telling stories on them. It only seemed fair. And so this is a family picture from a wedding this summer. Now, my son-in-law Cody is accurately depicting the emotions that all of us have being forced to pose for this photo. But Tani and I have been married for 30 years now. We've been blessed with 4 kids and now the bonus son-in-law. And so the story of our lives is really one of God's blessings. But that doesn't mean it's always been easy. In fact, 2008 was a very tough year for the Roddy family. In August of 2008, one of our daughters, when she was 3 years old, had an 11-hour brain surgery. And so the process of diagnosis and learning what was coming and getting ready for that and going through the surgery, that was the toughest thing that we've ever done as a family. Now, God brought healing through the surgery. Her recovery was off the charts, and she continues to do well more than 10 years later. But at the same time, we were also coming to grips with a diagnosis of another child on the autism spectrum. And so in 2008, it was just a crazy time in our family. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes there's one area of life that's a little bit crazy, and we can find success or solace in another area of life, like school or work. But that was not the case in 2008. In 2008, I was the president of a technology company, and late one November night, I found myself at the Newark, New Jersey airport. I was exhausted. I had been on the road for something like 27 out of the last 31 days, and I was literally crisscrossing the country trying to put a last-minute deal together. One that would sell our company in a way that satisfied our owners and cared for our employees. And we'd been trying to do that for several months without success. And I figured, you know what, if I get out there and I work hard enough, this can happen. But I was not just physically exhausted when I got back to Newark that night, I was emotionally exhausted. Because there was a general lack of trust with most of our customers. Some of them wouldn't even see me. And the ones who did not receive me so kindly. I talked to every one of our competitors, anyone in our industry, prospective customers, anyone who might participate in putting a deal together. I was determined to save the situation, but it was clear that November night in Newark that it was not going to happen. And so I'm physically tired, I'm emotionally exhausted, I haven't eaten, it's late at night. And it's one of those nasty early winter days where it's been raining most of the day and now it's turning to sleet. But I knew that I had a night booked at the airport hotel, and in the morning I could fly home and find some rest. And so I consulted the terminal map and I looked at it, and it looked like a pretty long walk if I stayed inside the terminal, but I thought I spied a shortcut. If I went outside, I could cross a parking lot and get straight to the hotel. I thought, this is great. I'm tired. So I go downstairs and I go outside, and what I found was much less of a shortcut and much more of an urban obstacle course. Now, at the Newark airport, there are taxis like every other airport, but they don't drive like they do at every other airport. And then there's limos flying through, and then you get to the regular traffic. So I got across that, and then I came to the parking lot, and there was a guardrail that I had to climb over. So I picked up my suitcase over the guardrail, got into the parking lot, got all the way across that. It was a big parking lot, and at the other side, guess what? Another guardrail. Climb over that. I can see Sweet Comfort in sight. The hotel is right there. It's about 50 more yards, but there's a vacant lot between where I am and the hotel. It's been raining all day. It's kind of muddy. And I just thought, I've come too far. I'm not turning back. I'm going for it. And so I picked up the suitcase, and I should add that I was a road warrior at that point. No road warrior worth their salt wears a coat because that just slows you down. So there I am in the sleet, in the freezing rain, carrying my suitcase, getting across the vacant lot. All I can think of is I got to get to that light of the hotel and rest. And I was about halfway across the lot when it happened. I just froze. My brain could not compute what was happening. But slowly I looked down at my feet and I saw I was standing in a puddle of slush. And it wasn't just on my shoe, it was like up over my ankle. And I just stood there trying to make sense of what was going on. And I remember looking up at the sky and literally shouting, "What am I doing?" I think we've all had those moments in life where we're exhausted or empty. We're at the end of our rope, and sometimes when we get to that breaking point, we want to ask ourselves, what am I doing? What am I doing here? Maybe that's a work situation that feels intolerable. Maybe it's a family feud that never ends. Maybe it's a class in school where you can never quite measure up. Or maybe you're trying to help a loved one, someone that you care about, only to watch them spiral further down. Or worse yet, have it blow up in our faces. We all have that moment in our lives where we don't just want to ask the question, we want to shout it. What am I doing? And I think in that moment, what's really going on, if we look under the surface inside of us, is that we're acknowledging exhaustion. It could be that we've done all that we can, but it doesn't seem to be making a difference. We've tried our best. Maybe we've even put in a superhuman effort, and it still falls short. Or we do what seems to be the right thing, and everyone around us perceives it's the wrong thing. We work our tails off, and we still don't succeed. And that goes against everything that we've been taught. Work hard, and you can accomplish anything. And here in Pittsburgh, I'm sure that we still have a cultural work ethic that if we work hard enough, great things will happen. And that's true. When we work hard, great things do happen. But what we don't know sometimes is when we work as hard as we can and it's still not enough, what do we do then? When work isn't enough. And so today we want to explore God's idea and principles for finding rest in the midst of life. Because we know God is for us, and He provides wisdom to approach life in a balanced way. So if you have your Bible or app with you today, I'd invite you to join me in Mark chapter 6. And if you need a Bible, the ushers will be coming down the aisle here in a second. If you just raise your hand, they'll be happy to give you one. And you can hang on to that if you want to. That is our gift to you this morning. So as we dive into Mark 6, we want to begin by busting a common myth about work and rest. And the myth is this: I'll rest when the work is done. Because the reality of life, and we've all lived life, is that the work is never done. But yet, we still need to find rest. And maybe you don't want to think about that this weekend because maybe there's some things piled up or you're wondering about the pile that's going to be there next week. But on Labor Day weekend, it's, for many, a time of a little bit different rhythm of life, maybe an extra day off, and a time to step back and catch our breaths and maybe even rest a little bit. And I want to begin by saying this: if you feel guilty about that, don't. Don't feel guilty about rest, because here's what we see Jesus doing. We're going to take a look at this entire chapter this morning, but I want to begin by dissecting a couple of verses right in the middle. Verses 30 and 31, this is what we read. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, Jesus said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." And so if Jesus is saying, let's go rest, that must mean that the work is done, right? Mission accomplished. There's nothing more to be done. It's now time to rest. That is not the case. And as we unpack this chapter, what we're going to see as we understand the context is this is a very chaotic time in the life and the ministry of Jesus and his disciples. There's so much going on in this season of life that rest, well, at best, it seems counterintuitive. As we begin looking at chapter 6, we see Jesus going back to his hometown, and we think, this is awesome. You know, a hometown reunion, a homecoming. He's going to be welcomed. And at first he is. It tells us that people were amazed at the wisdom and teaching of Jesus. But then they kind of turn. They begin to grumble. He's not well received. He's not accepted. And in verses 3 and 4, we begin with the people grumbling about Jesus. Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home. And so the chapter begins with Jesus being rejected in his hometown. And then, like life does for most of us, there are both ups and downs. It gets both better and worse. In the next segment, it's better. We see amazing progress in ministry with the disciples. Now, up till this time, Jesus has had the disciples follow him around, and they've been watching Jesus do ministry. But now it's time for something new. Jesus sends the disciples out in pairs and tells them to go preach, go heal the sick. I'll wait here. You come back and tell me how it goes. And so they go, and they come back, and they have these amazing reports for Jesus. Jesus, the power of God was at work. People are being healed. It's a great time. Things are looking up. But then there's kind of this strange interlude in the text in verses 14 through 29. At first glance, it seems like a flashback because it's talking about something that happened earlier, and that was John the Baptist being killed. King Herod got a little ticked off with John the Baptist, ended up having him beheaded. And that's how it starts, not exactly the best moment of ministry. But what's really going on is an explanation of King Herod's reaction to the miracles that are happening through the ministry of Jesus and the disciples. You see, word is traveling, and it actually gets to King Herod. And he's trying to make sense of what this is. He sees these things that are happening. This is not natural. There's something going on here that I don't understand. And he wonders out loud if Jesus is really John the Baptist raised from the dead. Now, King Herod, he's got the identities a little bit confused. John and Jesus are two different people, but he is the first to articulate that Jesus is connected to two ancient prophecies. The first one is this, that someone will come and prepare the way for Jesus, and that was indeed John the Baptist. Herod nailed that part of it. And there was also a prophecy that Jesus would be raised from the dead. And so the king, the very one who killed John, the one who's going to participate in the death of Jesus, is the first to articulate that maybe Jesus is this one who's going to be raised from the dead. And this is just kind of this chaotic swirl around Jesus and the disciples, being rejected in the hometown, going out doing amazing ministry, remembering John the Baptist's death. King Herod is now starting to get it and talk about who Jesus might be. And so all the while, there's like this ministry crescendo that's building. Jesus and the disciples are starting to do some amazing things. The power of God is flowing through them. Great stuff is happening. It's like we're watching a movie and the volume of the soundtrack keeps building and building, and the action is getting more and more intense, and we think it's time for the big scene in the movie. And what Jesus says is, let's rest. That's how we find ourselves in verse 31. Come away with me to a quiet place and rest. And we think, there goes the momentum. It was going so great. And Jesus says, let's rest. And we wonder about that. But Jesus knows that rest is a vital part of life because rest rejuvenates us. Remember how crazy this has been. This roller coaster of ups and downs that they've been on. Dishonored, disciples accomplishing new things, remembering John getting killed, Herod identifying that Jesus might be raised from the dead. And it's not over by any means. In fact, there's another great miracle about to happen, but Jesus knows that we all need to rest, that we all need to be rejuvenated at times. And so even when the work is not completed, maybe even especially when the work is not completed, there are often times where we need to step back and rest. We sometimes get the notion that rest is selfish, like somehow I'm cheating or I'm not accomplishing enough. But rest is a vital part of life. It's not selfish, it's good and necessary. Because rest prepares us for what's next. Jesus knows that there's so much more to be accomplished, much more to be done. He knows that life is a marathon and not a sprint. And that means that it is strategic to rest. We need to make time, not find time, make time for our bodies, for our minds, and our souls to be rejuvenated. We need to find those forms of rest so that we can recover and be in top form for whatever is next. Because even though rest is valid all on its own, it's also true that rest can set the stage for breakthrough. Immediately in the next verses, we read about a great miracle. In verses 41 through 44, it talks about what we know as the feeding of the 5,000. It says, taking the loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, Jesus gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. I believe it is not a coincidence that this great miracle happens immediately after Jesus calls the disciples to come away and to rest. And it's not just one. Immediately after that, there's another great miracle that happens. After the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus tells the disciples, take the boat and go to the other side of the lake. I'll catch up with you later. And so they must have set off celebrating what had happened. And remember, these guys are professional fishermen, and they are used to the water, and they find themselves in the middle of the lake in the middle of a storm that causes them to fear for their lives. And they cry out to God for help. God, save us. And Jesus walks on the water to them. And in the midst of the raging storm, he speaks the word, and the storm is calmed. Do you need Jesus to calm a storm in your life? I know I did. When I got home from that trip to Newark, I was intentional about changing the rhythm of my life, of going back to some of the principles that I knew but had gotten away from. I stopped the madness, stepped off the treadmill just for a hot minute, and recollected myself. Took a few days off, was able to reconnect with my family and find some sanity in the midst of chaos. And most importantly, I learned I can't do this on my own. Do you need Jesus to calm that storm for you? This rhythm of work and rest, of leaning in and working as hard as we can and going for it with all that we've got, that's important. But it's also important to know when it's time to step back and when to rest. And that's a little bit of an art of life. Because maybe once in a while we find rest in the midst of life. But mostly what we need to do is take these principles that God gives us and create rest in the midst of life. Life is crazy. We wonder, can I really do that? What about the house, the kids, the job, school, whatever, all these other responsibilities? It is God-honoring to care for our responsibilities. Don't hear anything different than that. It is God-honoring to care for our responsibilities. But it is not God-honoring to allow life to control us, and it's not God-honoring to live life like we don't need God. And so when we find ourselves asking or shouting that question, what am I doing? Or we recognize exhaustion, emptiness, or better yet, maybe we want to exercise a little bit of preventive maintenance and avoid that place in life, it's a very good time to ask ourselves when we're working and working and working and it doesn't seem like enough, is this one of those times where I need to step back and find some rest? And so let's look at these principles that God lays out regarding work and rest. You see, we all have these repeating rhythms in our lives, and God gives us a form of rest for each of them. The first rhythm of life is our daily rhythm, whether it's work or school or home or whatever it is for you. We have a daily rhythm of life, patterns of life that we live. And what we need to do in that is to recharge daily. We need to do it physically and spiritually. Physically, sleep is important, and spending time with God. So let's take a quick survey here. You get to participate. Quick survey, how many of us slept last night, even if it was just a little bit? Great, you've got a good start on applying this message. It's been shown and proven in study after study that sleep is directly connected to our health and helps our health in many, many ways. But true daily rest goes beyond sleep. We have to recharge spiritually as well. We see time and time again as we read the accounts of Jesus' life that he does this. Like in Mark 1:35, we read, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Here's what I take from that. If Jesus needed a quiet time every day, so do I. And if you don't have a structure or a method for doing that, I'd invite you to stop by the Welcome Center on your way out today and pick up what we call the SOAP bookmark. It's a little bookmark. And SOAP is a simple acronym that stands for Scripture, read a chapter of the Bible. O, make an observation. What do I think is going on there? A, application. What am I going to do differently today as a result of that? And then the P is prayer, asking God to help, recognizing that we can't do it on our own. And I know that this idea of recharging every day is vital. Most days I drive an electric car. It's a Nissan Leaf. Our family affectionately calls it Sparky. And here's the reality of life with Sparky. It's battery operated. And so there's a certain charge in the batteries. There's no gas backup. So whatever charge you leave the house with in the morning, unless you go to a recharge station and can find one of those, that's the charge you have to get you through the day. And so that works great. I love it. I'm cheap. Bought this car very inexpensively. It costs almost nothing to operate. So I get to use it through the day. When I get home at night, I plug it in. It's recharged. It's ready to go the next day. I have been accused once in a while of being a forgetful person. And so it is not unknown in our house that Sparky might not get plugged in when I bring him home at night. And when I go down to the garage the next morning, and that's happened, I have to make a very careful assessment of how much charge is left in the batteries and what I'm doing that day, and is it going to work? And most of the time, on a normal day, I can get by with that. It'll get through the second day. But if it goes 2 nights without being charged, it is not a useful vehicle at all. It doesn't work so well. I have learned that physically and spiritually, I am very much the same. Physically, if I miss a night of sleep or, just have one of those bad nights of sleep, I can get through the next day. But that happens 2 or 3 nights in a row, I'm not at my best. And the same thing spiritually. I love soap. It's not the only way to engage with the Bible or engage with God, but it's the one that I use every day. And if I miss a day, well, sure, there are other ways that I can connect with God through that day. But if I miss 2 days, it begins to not work so well. This idea of getting recharged physically and spiritually is important. So how about you? How are you going to build into your days this week a time to recharge? There's a blank on your outline. I'll give you a moment to fill that in. The next rhythm of life is weekly, and we need to refresh weekly. And we do that by creating a day for life-giving activities. You see, we have, for most of us, a weekly rhythm in life, and God commands us to rest each week. We can reach all the way back towards the beginning of the Bible in the book of Exodus and read this: 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. And it lays out some details, but it's summed up like this: For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. This is one of the areas where we can turn legalistic very quickly, this idea of Sabbath. I know that has happened in my life, and it was hugely helpful for me when I wrote or read what Pastor John Mark Comer wrote in his book, Garden City. And as he's unpacking what Sabbath was really meant to be, he introduces this idea of life-giving activities on one day each week. And so that looks a little different for each of us because we're wired differently and we have different schedules. So what works in my life may not work in your life in the details, but the principles, they apply. So here's how it works in my life. Fridays are my day off. Friday is my Sabbath day. And I try to practice life-giving actities. I will tell you, for me, that going to Walmart and battling the crowds for 2 hours, that is not a life-giving activity. I don't enjoy that. And so I try to stay away from it. Now, that doesn't mean I won't go to the store if I need something or I want something, but I don't drag the grocery list or that list of all the things I really meant to do this week to the store and try to do it on Friday. I try to find life-giving activities. Tani and I try to spend time together. Earlier in our marriage, date nights seemed to work fairly well, but they don't anymore. And so what we do is to carve out a couple of half days every month to just spend together. Now, we love the outdoors, and so you'll find us in a place like this. That's Laurel Hill State Park from maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, where we'll just go and enjoy being outside together. I like to fish. She likes to sit by the stream. It's a marriage made in heaven. We like to ride our bicycles together or just hike or simply rest and enjoy a beautiful place outside. So we try not to do chores. And at the end of those days, we try to have a special meal together, either just the two of us or with the family. Well, what we need to keep in mind is that Sabbath is not about rules. It's about finding life. And so there's a blank there. Think and pray about it for a moment. What life-giving activity are you going to practice this week? And then in each season of life, we need to get renewed. And we do that by getting away. Renew each season, get away. See, life is measured in seasons. And seasons come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. It can be a calendar year. It can be a school year. It can be the end of summer vacation, a kid's sports season. Seasons look different, but they all have this characteristic that that's been the theme of our life for a little while. And it's appropriate and good to find rest in every season. Maybe that's a long weekend at the end of a busy stretch, or a few hours away each month, indulging in a hobby, taking a vacation. Taking a yearly vacation is an important part of getting renewed, whether that's staying at home or going somewhere. The important part is to break the cycle and rest. We want to do that physically, we want to do that emotionally, but it's also important to get renewed spiritually as well. And the fancy term for that is a spiritual retreat. It's not nearly as hard as it sounds. For me, I take my Bible and my journal, and I go to a beautiful place outside and just rest with God. This is a picture from last summer, one of my spiritual retreats. Found this amazing lake with this dock and no one around, and I just got to sit and enjoy. Got to read a little bit of my Bible, got to pray a little bit, write some things in my journal, process some things with God that were going on in my mind. I can't tell you how renewed and revitalizing that is to go and spend that kind of a time with God. So I love to go to the mountains or a lake or a stream because that's the way I'm wired, but that might look different for you. But it would suggest you answer the question, how are you going to get away? How are you going to break the cycle at the end of this season? That's the final blank. Go ahead and fill that in. So each and every week at Crossroads, we don't want to just talk about what to do. We want to put it into practice. Listening, taking notes, that's great. But if we really want to make a difference, we've got to put it into practice in our lives. And so we're going to start that process this morning. I don't know what's going on in your life, how your morning was, or how your week has been. But I'm pretty sure every one of us could use just a minute to rest in God's presence. And so before the worship team comes and we sing together, just want to invite you to take a deep breath. Let that out. The Spirit and the presence and the power of God is here. We just sit and meditate on these scriptures and let God speak to your heart.